The moment my 12-year-old son stood up in that courtroom and defended me against his own father, I knew I had raised a warrior. But what he said next made even the stone-faced bailiff turn away to hide his tears. I'm Maya Chen, and 3 years ago I thought the hardest part of leaving my ex-husband Marcus would be packing our bags in the middle of the night while he was passed out drunk on the couch. I was wrong. The hardest part was sitting in that courthouse, watching my son Dylan realize that his father wasn't the hero he'd always believed him to be. Let me paint you a picture of where this story takes us. There I was, 34 years old, sitting in my beat-up Honda Civic outside the Pierce County Courthouse at 7 in the morning, my hands shaking so badly I couldn't even hold my coffee steady. The building loomed in front of me like some kind of medieval fortress, all concrete and intimidation, and I knew that in 2 hours I might walk out of there without my son. You see, my ex-husband Marcus Webb isn't just any ordinary guy. He's what people in our town call a success story. Owns 3 real estate offices, drives a Tesla, lives in that big house on Maple Street with the perfect lawn and the 3-car garage. The kind of man who looks good on paper. The kind of man who knows exactly how to make a woman feel like she's lucky to have him, right up until the moment she realizes she's not lucky at all. She's trapped. But Dylan, my beautiful, brave Dylan, he's the reason I found the strength to leave. At 9 years old, he asked me why Daddy only said nice things to me when other people were around. That question hit me like a lightning bolt because I realized my baby boy was watching everything, learning that this was how men were supposed to treat women, and I couldn't let that happen. So we left, packed 2 suitcases, took my grandmother's wedding ring that I'd hidden in an old jewelry box, and started over in a tiny 2-bedroom apartment across town. I got a job as a school nurse at Lincoln Elementary, working double shifts and going to nursing school at night because I was determined to build something better for us. For 3 years, we were happy. Really, truly happy. Dylan thrived in his new school, made friends, joined the soccer team. I watched him laugh again, really laugh. Not the nervous kind of laughter he used to do around his father. We had movie nights on our secondhand couch, built blanket forts in the living room, and ate cereal for dinners sometimes, just because we could. But Marcus couldn't stand it. Couldn't stand that we were doing fine without him. Couldn't stand that his son was calling our little apartment home instead of his big house. So 6 months ago, he filed for full custody, claiming I was an unfit mother, that Dylan needed stability and opportunities that only he could provide. His best friend, Jake Morrison, who runs the other half of Marcus's real estate empire, became his star witness. Jake's one of those guys who thinks money equals worth, who measures success by the size of your house and the brand of your car. He's also the guy who used to sit in my kitchen, eating my homemade cookies, while telling Marcus he was too soft on me. And there's Dylan, caught in the middle of all this adult ugliness. 12 years old now, with his father's dark hair but my stubborn chin, and eyes that have seen way too much for someone his age. He's the kid who does his homework without being asked, who saves his allowance to buy me flowers on Mother's Day, who still checks under his bed for monsters, but isn't afraid to stand up to bullies at school. The custody hearing was supposed to be routine. My lawyer, Sarah Kim, warned me that these cases usually favor the parent with more resources, but she thought we had a decent chance because Dylan was old enough for his preferences to matter. What she didn't prepare me for was how brutal Marcus's team would be, how they'd turn every sacrifice I'd made into evidence against me. As I sat in that car, staring at the courthouse steps, I had no idea that in a few hours, my quiet, thoughtful son would become the bravest person in that room. I had no idea that the boy I'd spent 3 years trying to protect would end up being the one to protect me. This is the story of the day my son taught me what real strength looks like. The automatic doors of the Pierce County Courthouse whooshed open, and I felt like I was walking into my own execution. Dylan's small hand slipped into mine, and I squeezed it tight, drawing strength from his calm presence. At 12, he had this way of carrying himself that reminded me of my father, steady, observant, like he was taking mental notes of everything around him. "Mom, you're crushing my fingers," he whispered with a small smile, and I realized I was gripping his hand like a lifeline. I loosened my hold but didn't let go. Today he was my anchor in a storm I wasn't sure I could survive. Let me tell you about the life we'd built together over these past 3 years. After leaving Marcus, I'd thrown myself into creating the kind of home I'd always dreamed of. Not the Pinterest perfect house with matching furniture and coordinated throw pillows that Marcus insisted on, but a real home filled with laughter and the smell of Dylan's favorite chocolate chip pancakes on Sunday mornings. Our apartment on Cedar Street wasn't much to look at from the outside. It was a converted duplex with creaky floors and a radiator that clanked like a ghost in chains, but it was ours. Dylan had covered his bedroom walls with his artwork and soccer trophies, while I'd slowly filled our living room with books from garage sales and plants that somehow thrived, despite my notorious black thumb. We had pizza and movie nights every Friday, and Dylan had learned to make scrambled eggs so he could surprise me with breakfast in bed when I worked late shifts at the school. I'd taken the job at Lincoln Elementary because it offered health insurance and allowed me to be home when Dylan got out of school. Being a school nurse meant dealing with everything from scraped knees to homesick kindergartners, but I loved it. The kids called me Nurse Maya, and Dylan would beam with pride when his classmates told him how cool it was that his mom worked at their school. Most evenings, you'd find us at the kitchen table, Dylan working on homework while I studied for my RN degree. It wasn't easy juggling work and night classes, but every time I felt like giving up, I'd look at my son's determined face as he tackled his own assignments, and I'd find the energy to keep going. We were a team, him and me against the world. Dylan had flourished in ways that broke my heart with joy. The anxious little boy who used to flinch when doors slammed too loud had grown into a confident kid who made friends easily and stood up for classmates who were being picked on. His teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, told me at parent conferences that Dylan had a natural ability to make other kids feel included, that he was the kind of child who noticed when someone was sitting alone at lunch. But Marcus couldn't see any of that. To him, our happiness was somehow a personal insult. The custody battle had started with what he called reasonable requests, wanting Dylan every other weekend, asking to be involved in school events. But when Dylan began choosing soccer practice over visits to his father's house, when he started calling our apartment home instead of Marcus's mansion, everything changed. The papers Marcus filed painted a picture of me that I barely recognized. According to his lawyers, I was a struggling single mother who couldn't provide Dylan with the advantages he deserved. They highlighted our modest income, the fact that Dylan shared a bathroom with me instead of having his own ensuite, that we ate generic cereal instead of name brands. They made our Friday night pizzas sound like neglect instead of tradition. What hurt most was how they twisted Dylan's loyalty into something ugly. They claimed I was alienating him from his father, that I'd somehow brainwashed him into preferring our simple life. They couldn't understand that maybe, just maybe, a 12-year-old boy preferred a mother who asked about his day over a father who only showed interest when there were witnesses. As we walked through those courthouse halls, Dylan's backpack bouncing against his shoulder, I felt the weight of everything we'd built together hanging in the balance. The security guards with their stern faces, the marble floors that echoed every footstep, the American flag hanging motionless in the still air. It all felt designed to make people like me feel small and out of place. But Dylan squeezed my hand and looked up at me with those wise brown eyes that had seen too much too young and whispered, "We've got this, Mom. No matter what happens, we've got each other." I had no idea how prophetic those words would turn out to be. The courtroom felt like a gladiator arena, and I was about to be fed to the lions. Judge Patricia Williams, a stern woman in her 50s with silver hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, called the session to order. Her voice echoed off the wood-paneled walls as she explained the custody proceedings, but all I could focus on was Marcus sitting across the aisle in his perfectly tailored navy suit, looking like he'd stepped out of a magazine ad for Successful Father of the Year. My lawyer, Sarah Kim, had warned me this wouldn't be easy, but nothing could have prepared me for the systematic dismantling of my character that followed. Marcus's attorney, a sharp-dressed shark named Richard Thornton, stood up with the confidence of a man who'd never lost a case. He cared about winning. "Your Honor," Thornton began, his voice smooth as silk. "We're here today because a young boy deserves better than the instability and financial insecurity his mother continues to provide. Dylan Webb deserves opportunities, resources, and the kind of stable environment that only his father can offer. The first witness was Marcus himself. Watching my ex-husband take the stand was like watching a master class in manipulation. Gone was the man who used to scream at me for leaving dishes in the sink, replaced by this calm, reasonable-sounding father who just wanted what's best for his son. "Dylan is a bright boy with tremendous potential," Marcus said, his voice heavy with what sounded like genuine concern. "But potential needs nurturing, needs resources. Maya means well, but she's struggling. Working multiple jobs, living paycheck to paycheck, no time for Dylan's extracurricular activities. He's missed 3 soccer practices this month because she couldn't leave work early to pick him up." I felt my face burn with shame because it was true. I had missed those practices, staying late to help a diabetic student who'd had a blood sugar episode. But Marcus made it sound like I was abandoning Dylan for my own selfish reasons. "I can provide Dylan with private tutoring, summer camps, college prep programs," Marcus continued. "Maya can't even afford to fix the air conditioning in their apartment. Dylan spent last summer sweating in that place while I have a pool, a game room, everything a growing boy needs." Sarah objected when Thornton started asking leading questions about my emotional stability, but the damage was being done. Marcus painted a picture of a devoted father being kept from his son by a bitter ex-wife who couldn't provide basic necessities. Then came Jake Morrison, and my heart sank even further. Jake had been Marcus's best friend since college, his business partner, and the guy who used to tell Marcus he was whipped whenever I asked for help with household chores. Now he was sitting in that witness chair like some kind of family expert. "I've known Marcus for 15 years, Jake testified, his expensive watch glinting under the courtroom lights. "He's one of the most responsible, dedicated fathers I know. But Maya—" He paused dramatically, shaking his head. "She's always been manipulative. During their marriage, she had this way of making Marcus feel guilty for working hard to provide for his family." I wanted to scream. This was the same Jake who used to hit on the waitresses when we'd go out to dinner as couples. The same Jake who'd once told Marcus that children were expensive pets until they were old enough to be useful. "The truth is," Jake continued, leaning forward like he was sharing a painful secret, "Dylan is being used as a weapon. Maya has turned that boy against his father, filled his head with stories about how much better their life is without Marcus. It's emotional abuse, plain and simple." But then came the moment that shattered something inside me. Thornton asked Jake directly, "In your professional opinion, Mr. Morrison, knowing both parents as you do, what would you say about Maya's fitness as a primary custodian?" Jake looked right at me, his eyes cold as winter, and said, "She doesn't deserve a second chance, Your Honor. She had her opportunity to be a good wife and mother, and she walked away from it. Now she's just a burden to that boy." The words hit Dylan like a physical blow. I watched my son's face crumble, his hands clenching into fists in his lap. For 3 years, I'd shielded him from the worst of his father's friends, from their crude jokes and casual cruelty, but there was no protecting him from this. "She's dragging Dylan down with her," Jake continued, completely oblivious to the 12-year-old boy whose world he was destroying. "That kid deserves better than to be raised by someone who can't even keep a marriage together." The courtroom was silent except for the scratch of the court reporter's fingers flying across her machine. Judge Williams looked troubled, and I could see the case slipping away from us with every calculated word. That's when I noticed Dylan's jaw set in a way I recognized. The same stubborn determination I'd felt the night I packed our bags and left Marcus forever. The silence in the courtroom after Jake's testimony felt suffocating. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears as Judge Williams made notes on her legal pad, her expression unreadable. Sarah squeezed my arm under the table, but I could see the defeat in her eyes. We both knew how this looked. A struggling single mother versus a successful businessman with character witnesses, painting me as manipulative and unfit. But it was Dylan's reaction that scared me most. My usually calm, thoughtful son was trembling beside me, his small hands balled into fists, so tight his knuckles had gone white. I'd seen him angry before, when kids at school picked on his friend Tommy, when he watched movies where the good guys got hurt. But this was different. This was rage mixed with a heartbreak that no 12-year-old should have to feel. "Mom," he whispered, his voice so low I almost couldn't hear him. "Mom, they're lying about you." I put my hand on his shoulder, trying to calm him down, but I could feel the tension radiating from his small frame. "Dylan, baby, it's okay. This is how these things work. Sarah will get our turn to—" "No." He cut me off, something he'd never done before. "No, Mom, it's not okay. They're saying things that aren't true, and everyone's just sitting here listening to them." Sarah leaned over, her voice barely a whisper. "Dylan, I know this is hard, but you need to stay quiet. Children don't usually testify in custody cases, and why not?" Dylan's voice was getting louder, drawing glances from around the courtroom. "Why don't I get to tell the truth when everyone else gets to lie?" I watched my son's face, and it was like seeing myself in the mirror 3 years ago. That moment when I finally realized I didn't have to sit quietly and take whatever Marcus and his friends wanted to dish out. Dylan had inherited more than just my stubborn chin. He'd inherited my refusal to let bullies win. "Sarah," Dylan said, turning to our lawyer with a determination that made him sound older than his years, "I want to speak. I want to tell the judge what really happened." Sarah shook her head quickly. "Dylan, it's not that simple. Your father's lawyer would get to cross-examine you and—" "Let him." Dylan's voice was steady now, the trembling gone. "Let him ask me whatever he wants. I'm not afraid of him anymore." The words "anymore" hit me like a punch to the gut. How long had my brave little boy been afraid? How many nights had he lain awake worrying about this day, preparing himself for this moment? I looked at Sarah, who was clearly torn between protecting Dylan and recognizing that we were losing badly. Across the aisle, Marcus was whispering urgently to his lawyer, probably assuming a child's testimony would only help their case. After all, what could a 12-year-old possibly say that would change anything? But they didn't know my son. They didn't know that Dylan had spent 3 years watching me rebuild our lives from nothing, that he'd seen me cry over bills and then get up the next morning to make his favorite pancakes anyway. They didn't know that he'd held my hand through every doubt, every scared moment, every small victory. "Your Honor." Sarah stood up, her decision made. "I'd like to request permission for Dylan Webb to address the court." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Williams raised her eyebrows, clearly surprised. "Miss Kim, this is highly unusual. The child's welfare is what we're here to determine, but having him testify—" "I understand the court's concerns," Sarah interrupted respectfully. "But Dylan is 12 years old, certainly old enough to have his voice heard regarding his own custody arrangement. Given the testimony we've heard today, I believe he has the right to speak for himself." Marcus's lawyer jumped up. "Your Honor, this is clearly a desperate attempt to manipulate the court's emotions. A child shouldn't be put in the position of choosing between parents." But Dylan was already standing, his small frame somehow filling the courtroom with his presence. "Your Honor," he said, his voice clear and strong, "I'm not choosing between my parents. I'm choosing to tell the truth." Judge Williams studied Dylan for a long moment, and I could see her weighing the decision. Finally, she nodded. "Very well, Dylan, you may approach the witness stand. But I want you to understand that this is your choice. No one is forcing you to speak." Dylan looked back at me, and in that moment I saw the little boy who used to crawl into my bed after nightmares transform into someone I barely recognized, someone brave enough to fight for both of us. "I know," he said to the judge, "and I choose to speak." The courtroom remained frozen in stunned silence for what felt like an eternity after Dylan returned to his seat beside me. Judge Williams sat motionless, her glasses still in her hand, staring at the space where my son had just delivered the most powerful speech I'd ever heard. Even the clock on the wall seemed to have stopped ticking. Then, slowly, she put her glasses back on and straightened her papers with deliberate precision. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight that made everyone in the room lean forward. "In 23 years on this bench," Judge Williams began, "I have heard countless custody cases. I've listened to lawyers argue about financial stability, living conditions, and parental fitness. But rarely have I heard such clarity about what truly matters in a child's life." She looked directly at Dylan, then at me, then finally at Marcus and Jake. Mr. Morrison, your testimony today revealed more about character than perhaps you intended. And Mr. Webb, your son's words have given this court invaluable insight into the reality of his daily life. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. Sarah squeezed my hand under the table, but neither of us dared to breathe. Therefore, Judge Williams continued, custody of Dylan Webb will remain with his mother, Maya Chen. Visitation with his father will continue as previously established, with the possibility of modification based on demonstrated changes in behavior and attitude. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to shatter the tension in the room. Marcus's face went through a series of emotions: shock, anger, and finally something that might have been shame. His expensive lawyer was already shuffling papers, preparing for what I knew would be an appeal. But it was Jake's reaction that surprised me most. The man who had called me a burden just an hour earlier was staring at Dylan with something that looked almost like respect. As Marcus stormed toward the exit, Jake lingered for a moment, catching Dylan's eye. "Kid," he said quietly, "that took guts." Dylan looked up at him with those wise brown eyes and replied, "It took truth, Mr. Morrison. Sometimes they're the same thing." Outside the courthouse, the September air felt crisp and clean, like the world had been washed new. Dylan and I sat on the stone steps, watching people hurry past with their own legal battles and life dramas, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe properly. "Mom," Dylan said, leaning against my shoulder, "are you proud of me?" I wrapped my arms around him, this brave little person who had just fought a battle that grown men couldn't handle. "Dylan, I have never been more proud of anyone in my entire life. But sweetheart, you shouldn't have had to do that. You shouldn't have had to defend me like that." He was quiet for a moment, watching a group of pigeons fight over a dropped sandwich. Then he said something that made my heart both break and soar at the same time. "Mom, remember when I was little and had that nightmare about the monster under my bed? You told me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is turn on the light and look the monster right in the face." I nodded, remembering those middle-of-the-night conversations when he was 7 years old. Well, today I turned on the light, and you know what? The monsters weren't as scary as I thought they'd be. They were just sad, angry people who forgot how to be kind. Sarah joined us on the steps, her professional composure finally cracking into a genuine smile. "Dylan, in 15 years of family law, that was the most powerful testimony I've ever witnessed. You should consider becoming a lawyer someday." Dylan grinned, suddenly looking 12 again instead of like the wise old soul who'd just schooled a courtroom full of adults. "Nah, I think I want to be a teacher, like Mrs. Rodriguez. She says the best way to fight unfairness is to help kids learn to think for themselves." 6 months later, something unexpected happened. Marcus called asking if he could take Dylan to lunch. Not the court-mandated visitation, just a simple lunch where they could talk. Dylan, with a maturity that still amazes me, agreed on one condition: that his father apologize to me first. They met at our kitchen table, the same table where Dylan and I had eaten countless dinners and worked on homework together. Marcus looked older, humbler somehow, and when he said, "I'm sorry, Maya, for everything," I could tell he meant it. "Dad," Dylan said that day, "I love you, but I won't let you hurt my mom anymore. We can try to be a family again, but it has to be a different kind of family, one where everybody gets respected." Marcus nodded, tears in his eyes. "I'd like to try, son. I'd really like to try." That day in the courtroom, I thought I was fighting for custody of my child, but I realize now that Dylan was fighting for something much more important. He was fighting for the truth, for dignity, and for the radical idea that love shouldn't require anyone to make themselves smaller. Sometimes the people we think we're protecting are actually the ones protecting us. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do is raise a child brave enough to stand up for what's right, even when the whole world is watching. As I tucked Dylan into bed tonight, 3 years after that life-changing day in the courthouse, I still think about the lesson he taught everyone in that room. Sometimes we spend so much time trying to shield our children from the harsh realities of the world that we forget they're watching us navigate those realities every single day. They're learning not just from what we tell them, but from how we handle the moments when life tries to break us down. Dylan is 15 now, on the honor roll, captain of his soccer team, and still the kid who notices when someone needs a friend. Marcus and I aren't friends, but we've learned to co-parent with respect. He's kept his promise to Dylan. No more cutting remarks, no more trying to buy love with expensive gifts. It's been a slow process, but Dylan was right that day. People can change if they really want to. But the most important thing I learned is this. Strength isn't about having all the answers or never showing fear. Real strength is teaching your children that their voice matters, that truth is worth fighting for, and that sometimes the smallest person in the room can be the bravest one there. The woman I was before that courthouse, scared, doubting herself, worried she wasn't enough, she's still part of me. But now I know that being enough isn't about having the biggest house or the fullest bank account. It's about raising a human being who will stand up for what's right, even when it's scary, even when the odds are against them. Dylan once told me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's feeling afraid and doing the right thing anyway. That 12-year-old boy taught a room full of adults what real character looks like, and he reminded me that sometimes the greatest gift we can give our children isn't protection from the storm, but the tools to weather it with dignity. If this story touched your heart, hit that thumbs up button and let me know in the comments what moments resonated with you most. Have you ever had someone unexpected stand up for you when you needed it most? Share your story below. This community is built on supporting each other through life's toughest moments. And if you want to hear more real-life stories about finding strength in the darkest times, about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell. Every week I share stories that remind us that we're stronger than we think, braver than we believe, and more loved than we know. Until next time, remember, your voice matters, your story matters, and sometimes the person you're meant to inspire is looking up at you right now, learning how to be brave by watching you refuse to give up. I'll see you in the next one. Stay strong, stay kind, and never underestimate the power of standing up for what's right.